I'm out taking a stroll along Lake Erie. Today's January 22nd, 2024. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about rental property calculations. A lot of people make a mistake that costs them a lot of money when they're buying rental property, and that is assuming that rent minus your payment is cash flow. That's the quickest way to lose money buying rental property. So someone might come in and say, okay, my rent on this property, you're doing calculations, you're gonna buy a rental property. The rent is $1,000 and your payment is $600. Well, you assume, okay, well, that's $400 a month that I'll be putting in my pocket. So you do your calculations and you get your cash on cash return and what your ROI is gonna be. But when you buy the property, you quickly learn that that's not the case at all. You have expenses that you have to allocate for, and I'm going to go over those expenses now and what I use for percentages in order to calculate what cash flow is going to be. And this gives me the best idea of what my return will be in the end, and it kind of helps me determine whether or not I will even offer on a property and what I am willing to pay. You have to allocate for vacancy. Now, you always have to allocate for the property being empty at some point. It's never going to be 100% occupied all the time. And if you say that it is, then that's an illusion. It's a false illusion, because you are going to have turnover at some point. Somebody's going to move out of the property. You're going to have to fix it up and, get a new tenant in there. So you might say, okay, well, I can get somebody in the right away. Well, you always want to take a percentage for vacancy, no matter what. You never know what you're going to run into. You're never going to have a tenant that comes in. Maybe somebody has a tenant that's been there for 20 years. Well, in my experience with my rental properties, I have 10 doors at the current time. My average tenancy is about 2 years, but you will have people that'll come in and move out after a year. Things change in people's lives. I use 5% allocation for vacancy. Some people use 8%. Now, 8% equates to 1 month. I think that's a little excessive. So I use 5% for vacancy calculation. Now, these calculations that I'm giving you, the percentages, are based on the rent amount. So I use 5% for vacancy. And if we use an example of $1,000 a month in rent, then that's $50 a month that I am putting in the bank in order to allocate for when you eventually have a vacancy. So besides vacancy, another thing to account for would be capital expenditures. What are capital expenditures? This fancy term that people use. Capital expenditures are items that you can predict are going to have a useful life, and they will eventually go bad and you'll have to replace them. These items include big items like a roof, HVAC, things that will wear out. A hot water tank. So a hot water heater, hot water tank may have a 10 to 15 year useful life. A furnace may have a 20, 25 year useful life. A roof may have a 30-year useful life. But you're always going to have those things that'll come up if you hold a property long term. If you buy and hold a property, you're going to have these things come up. So you want to have a little bit of money in reserves when something like this goes wrong. So I use 8% for capital expenditures when I'm doing my calculations. This allows you to put a little bit of money in the bank in order to have some funds for these big ticket items when they come up. So I use 8% for capital expenditures. That also depends on the property. If you buy a brand new property as a rental, you might put 5% down for that. If you buy an old property that's a century home that doesn't have anything updated, you might want to go a little bit higher. You could go even 10, even to 15%, because you're going to have to replace those items eventually. And you don't want to, put these items off, because you're going to have to pay them, and not calculating for them is just setting yourself up for failure. So another thing on top of capital expenditures in that same realm is maintenance and repairs. You're always going to have things that get messed up. Blinds that a dog is going to chew on, carpet, that a cat's going to scratch up. So I use 5 to 10% for repairs and maintenance, depending on the property again. 5% for a newer property, up to 10% for an older property. And that's definitely one expense not to leave out. One other thing to allocate for that a lot of people forget is property management. So you might say, oh, well, I don't need to allocate for that because I'm going to manage myself. That's another way to buy yourself a job. If you buy an entire rental portfolio and you're not allocating for property management, you're buying yourself a job, because you're going to be the one managing that property forever. And then when it comes time to have a property manager take over the management of the properties, they're going to charge you 8 to 10%. And if that's something that you didn't allocate for, then again, that's one way to lose money. I always allocate 8 to 10% for property management, even though I have always self-managed. I self-manage now, but I don't want to self-manage all my properties in the future when I go to retire, or if I have a big portfolio. You want to allocate for this. So 8 to 10% is generally what you will find property managers charging. So make sure to allocate for that when you're doing your cash flow projections. Again, that's 8 to 10% of the rent amount. So if it's $1,000 a month in rent, you want to allocate $80 to $100 for property management. So we're here at the beach and we've got some ice shoves. Always be careful if you're out along the ice. Never walk on these ice shoves. They're very beautiful, but I won't even get close. I work a lot over in Ottawa County, over Port Clinton area, and I was looking at my social media this morning and I saw that they had a south wind and a lot of ice fishermen were once again stuck out there on the lake. So they're doing some helicopter and airboat rescues out there right now in order to get these fishermen back in. If you guys have any questions about rental property, if you want me to look at a specific property and give you my thoughts about what the cash flow would be, then I'm more than happy to do that. Feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Even if you're not my client, if you're anywhere out there, I'll hop on a Zoom call if you'd like. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Stay safe, stay warm. Have a good day. Bye.